Hi there. This is part two of a two-part series about the book No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz, PhD. And if you didn't check out part one, please do so before you listen to part two, because there's a very provocative question that we start part two with, and it'd be good for you to have the context in part one. And I hope that you'll forgive me for putting this into two parts, but the episode got really long. We were so excited listening to what Uri Talmor had to say and the questions we were bringing forward to him. So please do check out part one. Take care now. Enjoy the listen. Bye.
Things happening in the world and seeing the bad of a lot of human behavior and what's going on. And so kind of this belief that people are good and just like born good in this world. I interestingly had a hard time believing that, or kind of grappling with that, because of these judgments that I've made, or my exposure. And I think it might be kind of a Gen Z thing with everything that we've seen go on in the world. I'm wondering if you have any kind of thoughts about that, like you know maybe for someone, or maybe someone in my generation who has seen a lot of, and I mean all of us have seen you know, maybe exiled parts come out, or in people, and we associate it with like a bad behavior or scary behavior. Um, and how we kind of maybe would change that mind frame.
That's a great question, Kiki. The way I think about it now, and I've always been biased towards people are inherently good, in essence because of the work I've done. And I've never worked with anyone I didn't just fall in love with and could see their inherent goodness, and that in a safe space that could come up. I see some of what you're speaking to is we've created an insane world where people are living in war zones and are struggling to make ends meet and are stressed and in survival mode. If you think about the Maslow hierarchy of needs, like how many people on the planet just have the basic essentials? And it's a tragedy because we have the resources. We could redistribute everything. Nobody needs to be homeless or hungry. So it's just pure insanity that we have the type of oligarchy that we have. Like, how unethical for people to be living that when people don't even have food. Like, we can't even figure that out. In that context, it'll absolutely bring out the worst in people. So what I'd recommend, there's another model called Polyvagal Theory, which essentially reframes human nature. What they theorize, but you can see it, especially in the psychotherapy work, is it's almost like our nervous system has three different brains. There's the reptile brain you've probably heard of, and then there's the limbic system, the mammal brain, and then there's the neocortex and more of a human brain. And actually, the way I talk about it is the lowest center is like a fish brain. It's so primitive. The only response it has is to freeze. And then with time, we evolved, or animals evolved to the point where these were fish that were deep, 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 deep in the ocean, and there wasn't a lot of oxygen. So these fish didn't have the energy to fight flight, didn't develop any of that, but they could freeze. And hopefully, if that works, no one eats them, they live to swim another day. And then later, on top of that system, we developed fight flight. And the thing is we'll do the most advanced system first. So reptile, fight, flight, and then if that doesn't work, we play possum, and hopefully we look dead enough and not tasty. Mammals evolved a whole nother area of the brain because we went from, I say, as like an earth organisms, we went from laying a bunch of eggs and just moving on to wanting to have a relationship with our young. I'm talking about it as if like we're believing in intelligent design, or there's some sort of plan towards evolving in a certain direction that's more relational. And it's just what we've seen in nature. So now we're not just laying a bunch of eggs and leaving, we're having much fewer offspring, and we are raising them. So we had to develop a third part of our nervous system, and I should have named these: dorsal vagal fish brain, sympathetic activation reptile, And then ventral vagal is mammal. In human, we had to downregulate the reptile heart that constantly moves at a very fast pace so that we don't eat our young and we can start to be relational and to start to allow us to have facial expressions and emotion and all these subtleties of relationship. Reptiles don't make a lot of facial expressions. They don't make any. So when you look at humans through that lens, yes, we see a lot of people at these lower levels of evolution, but that's because we haven't learned how to even be human yet, I would argue. Then you make a really good argument that we're still not human. We're still kind of crawling our way out of, but I've seen just miraculous things happen at summer camps where these camps I worked as a big part of my professional development, where we had these kids for a week. We did a bunch of group counseling. It's kind of like grief camp, but without a focus on grief. We did team building. It's very empowering for the kids. The first night, they got to make up all the rules. They made up the schedule. Everything was decided by consensus. Shoot me now. It was amazing. I loved it. And some of the older ones were like, are we really doing this again this year? They hated me. But I'm like, we're doing it again this year. Why? Because it was such an amazing process. And to see 8-year-olds have a voice with 17-year-olds and create the week, it was so empowering. It was so bonding. So that's a little bit of an aside. It was just an amazing, amazing camp. I completely fell in love with it. Everyone's crying by the last day. Nobody wants to go home. And the miraculous thing we saw every single camp session, we'd have a number of kids. We started to get known as being like, you know, kind of this special thing. And some parents would send their kids as like a last resort. Like, and we understand, counselors, if you send Joey home after a few days, trust me, we get it. Joey's Joey. I'm like, okay, more times than not, within hours, these children completely transformed. They were like angels. And there's a parent trainer I love, Glenn Lytham. He talks about when children are misbehaving, they're simply angels out of tune. And I saw that over and over and over. I see it all the time with my clients. I see it with their parts. So I think the thing is, Kiki, is human nature. It's really the more interesting question is not what's our human nature. Obviously, look at history. We're all of it. But what's our highest human nature? And how can we support each other in continuing in that direction? Because I think nature's done a great job. And then something happened to derail us. Call it patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism, whatever like we have gone way off track as far as I'm concerned. So that's
I gotta say that after reading and doing some work on my own parts, the people that I had characterized in my life as one dimension, like she is so mean, right? I could close my eyes and imagine them with parts, and that they had that protector out because of something that had happened to them. Right. And it changed my viewpoint that people aren't one dimension, right? That they, no matter how mean and nasty somebody can be, they have other parts.
yeah. And
They have other parts too.
Absolutely. We're so complex. People are so complex and so nuanced and so creative. And the reason this is also to kind of land that one piece about judgments, Dewey would say that we go to judgment when we don't feel safe. We're out of control. And a judgment is just quick and easy. And it's a way to feel in control and to not have the unknown. And it takes energy, it takes blood getting to this part of our brain to look for those nuances, to remember people are parts, to stay curious and to not objectify the other person. And that's where a lot of the violence happens. And it's a multiple stage process. Step one, maybe I'm out of control, I'm unsafe, I label you something, and now you are really easy to abuse because you're just a meanie. And I
Yeah.
don't, it's okay to beat up on meanies. And that's the recipe.
Yeah.
Government abuses and immigrants, new immigrants, like it's just label, 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 and now you're an object. And it's just a lie. It's an illusion. It's not true. But we have to create safe enough world and spaces where people feel resourced enough to just have their whole brain working. And then I think naturally we are more curious and we are more patient and we are more relational. Here's the irony of all of this. We all want to love. We want to be in a relationship. Everyone's lonely.
Yeah.
Everybody's it's this other part of our nature. And we just haven't created a world where that can simply be supported. And IFS is one of those models that very brilliantly creates a type of reparenting dynamic so that people can very quickly kind of reorganize their psyches. And I think just integrate and express more of what's more true. But it's higher level, and we have to invest in each other to bring that out.
So cool. Kiki, any more questions for Uri or?
No, I really appreciate your kind of thoughts there about my question too, by the way. Yeah, I think the world sometimes can definitely be an unsafe place, and all of us, I think, at the core are, you know, have that protector survival instinct that comes out sometimes as well in those situations. But definitely, the opportunity there to be your higher self and, the goodness that's there. I definitely understand that now. That was kind of hard for me to think like, well, you know, they did this action. So what does it say about their character? But more so remembering that there's also other parts there as well. Help me kind of help my kind of what would it be like framing there. So I appreciate that. Um, I don't really have any other specific questions. That was kind of the one for me that I was like, I might need more thoughts on that.
That's good, honey.
Yeah.
And Uri, is there anything else that you'd like to tell our listeners before we end our episode?
Trying to think any final things about IFS. I definitely recommend No Bad Parts. After we talked, I hadn't read it yet, and so I made it a point to read it. It's absolutely excellent.
Yeah.
Dick had a different book out there called Introduction to the Internal Family Systems Model, and I loved it. It was much easier to understand. It was written for lay people, and this is like 15 years ago. It was a brilliant, wonderful, sweet little book, and it's gone. Like I don't think you can find it anywhere. And so I emailed Dick and I asked, I haven't gotten around to reading No Bad Parts. Is this just an updated version of da da da? He sent me he usually doesn't do this, but it's a super short email. It's like, no, it's not. Definitely not. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I read it and I'm like, oh my God, this thing is amazing. He's gotten so much more spiritual. There's so many more nuances now around ages. You were mentioning, Kiki, the night part. I think all parts are younger parts and they're just different ages. And so something the listeners can explore is if you have a protector part that shows up in a certain way, ask that part, when did it start being that way? And that usually traces it right back. And it's like, oh yeah, middle school, armor up. Found, heavy metal music and okay, we get it now. But that's something to stay curious about because I think so much of it is a reparenting job. But anyways, now in No Bad Parts, there's so many more of those kinds of nuances, making it more, I feel, kind of psychodynamic. It's absolutely lovely book. And I do recommend the audiobook. I biased, I just love Dick. He is such a wonderful, wonderful human being. He's so down to earth. He's done so much. And I've known him forever. So I knew him before IFS got viral, but I wish he would have read the whole book. And that's maybe just my bias, but he reads the meditations in there. on the audiobook, and that the audiobook's worth it just for that. There are, I want to say, at least 6 meditations. That is an amazing way to start and to give you an actual experience of all this if you know don't quite have access to a therapist. So no bad parts. I can't recommend it highly enough. I think the last thing I'll throw in here as like a self promotion is my partner and I. She is an amazing career coach who works with the Enneagram, and we're developing a training institute called the Healed Healer Institute. And a lot of that is inspired by my work and the camps, but also in the Naropa University. It's a very experiential program. So, and I think most, if not all classes, our students just get in there and practice and do therapy and work with each other. And there's a big emphasis on you need to do your own work. Like you'll do harm as a therapist if you don't. So we're building a training institute where it'll fundamentally be geared towards people training in parts work and IFS and Gestalt and other models, but by your own healing, through your own healing, and where people be able to pair up with each other and connect and support one another. And there'll be courses and other opportunities. So healedhealer.com is where people can sign up for the mailing list. And then from that list, I will update folks on what we develop over time. And the only thing I have available now, if you're a Naropa graduate, counseling graduate, is I mentioned earlier, I'm teaching IFS in the spring. People can audit that class if they're a Naropa grad.
Okay.
And maybe at some point they'll open it up as a continuing ed offering.
Great.
That's going to be a fun class.
And then if somebody just wants to maybe get a referral from you, or, you know, what's a good way for them to reach you?
Oh, Uri at consciousheartintegration.com.
And we'll have that in the show notes for you listeners. So not to worry, but we'll have it there. Good.
Okay, actually, a question has come up for me now that I thought about it, if you don't mind. So I think a big buzzword in my generation is inner child work. I think there's so much talk about connecting with the inner child, or, you know, shadow work is another, like on TikTok, they have these booklets that you can purchase. I don't know or if you've heard of them, like these shadow work books. But I guess for our listeners at home, inner child work and IFS, those are kind of different, right? Do you work usually in tandem with each other? Or could you explain maybe, you know, I think people my generation might think of them as kind of the same, but they're not, right?
They're overlap. So if I had to make like colons, you have inner child work and then you have IFS. So anything that is within inner child work would be found in IFS, and IFS just has these other nuances around protector parts. So that's not just the inner child, but I actually would argue those are all inner children. It's just some are younger and some are teenagers. Like, when did you start smoking pot? Oh, that firefighter, 16 years old. So we touched on that. So there's inner child work. IFS is actually not by any stretch of the imagination the first parts model. We'll just say the first one was psychoanalysis. Id, ego, superego. He was talking about parts. And if you really want to like be a geek about this, go read Freud. He's an amazing writer. He was like a psyche anthropologist. His writing is the best. It's so good. And he was writing about this stuff. And he sounds like Peter Levine. Like, he talks about dissociation and trauma. It's amazing, amazing work. So that was a parts model, not like explicitly, but he was talking about parts of the psyche. Psycho, dynamic. The psyche is dynamic. Then you had Jung, and he has his archetypes and complexes and schemas, his languaging for it. But he did a lot of parts work in his own way. And he essentially was the first person-ish to do the inner dialogue that IFS talks about. He just called it active imagination. Do I have this book handy? Yes. This is an excellent resource, Jung on Active Imagination. This will read like IFS in a lot of ways, parts work, inner dialogue. Then you have oh, what's it called? Voice dialogue. It's another one. Ego state therapy is brilliant. And I love that term. Some people aren't so, fans of parts. And there's something about just calling it an ego state. It's a state that comes in and comes out. I love that languaging. It's a whole nother parts model. Psychosynthesis was one of the earlier, more spiritual models. You talk about higher self and parts. So it's all good. They're all amazing models. Like when just to go from talk therapy culture to experiential depth psychotherapy, that is a whole different world. I can tell you how many times I've had clients first, second session, and they're like, what the did we just do? I've done a ton of therapy and I've never done whatever that was. It's all these models, and IFS is just my favorite out of the bunch, and has put together an incredible protocol just based on patterns he saw. Identify the parts, help them unblend, witness the exile, retrieve the exile and update them, unburden the exile, invite back what the exile lost out on, and now ask these other parts if they want new jobs. That's genius. That's like a soul retrieval or a hero's journey. It's very archetypal in a way. So it's all good. Whoever's learn it all, learn what you're excited to learn. I'm just excited that this is becoming more the mainstream, not just talk
Yeah.
therapy.
Well, we're so
Really.
glad that we've gotten this opportunity with you.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for letting me share with your audience.
Yeah. And Kiki, thank you, honey, for bringing this to us. I mean, if you hadn't said the book, we wouldn't have this great episode. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. I'm glad I think I was making roasted broccoli or something or cauliflower when I called you, and I was like, have you heard of this book or have you heard of this concept? I think it'd be really good for an episode. And yeah, such a joy. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Ron. Thank you, Yuri, for being here.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Uri, thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for being here. Talk to you soon. Bye.